It was supposed to be a relaxing vacation for Sarah and her friends. They had rented a cozy cabin through Airbnb in the remote woods of upstate New York, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The cabin was a rustic and charming wooden structure, with a large stone fireplace and a picturesque view of the surrounding forest. But from the moment they arrived, things felt off. The woods were eerily quiet, and the cabin seemed to creak and groan with every gust of wind. Sarah brushed off her unease as just nerves from being in an unfamiliar environment, but as the days went on, the sense of dread that hung over the cabin only grew stronger. Each time Sarah ventured outside, she felt as though something was watching her. She tried to put it out of her mind and focus on enjoying the vacation, but it was impossible. Even inside the cabin, she felt as though she was being watched. One evening, Sarah decided to explore the woods around the cabin. She told her friends she was going for a walk and set out on the trail. The forest was quiet, and she was enjoying the peace and solitude. But as she wandered further into the woods, she realized she was lost. She tried to retrace her steps, but everything looked the same. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, but there was no one there. She picked up the pace, her heart pounding in her chest. But the footsteps only grew louder. She ran as fast as she could, dodging trees and jumping over roots. The footsteps were getting closer, and she could hear heavy breathing. She was about to be caught. But just as she thought all was lost, she burst out of the woods and stumbled into a clearing. The figure was gone, and Sarah was alone in the woods. She couldn't explain what had just happened, but she knew it was something she would never forget. Back at the cabin, Sarah was a nervous wreck. She told her friends what had happened, but they didn't believe her. They thought she was just being paranoid. But Sarah knew what she had seen, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were in danger. That night, the group settled in for the night. They locked all the doors and windows, but Sarah still couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. What was lurking outside? Was it a person? A wild animal? Or something much, much worse? As the night wore on, Sarah heard the sound of scratching at the door. It was soft at first, but it grew louder and more insistent. She lay frozen in her bed, too afraid to move. Then, suddenly, the scratching stopped. Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Sarah's own breathing. She listened intently, waiting for any sign of danger. But there was nothing, just the stillness of the night. Finally, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She got out of bed and crept to the door. She put her ear to the wood and listened. But there was no sound. Slowly, she reached for the doorknob and turned it. The door creaked open, and she peered into the darkness. But there was no one there. Just the empty hallway, shrouded in shadows. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief and closed the door. She returned to bed, but she still couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. The next day, Sarah decided to do some research on the cabin. She found out that it was built in the early 1900s by a man named Jack. According to the local legend, Jack had gone insane and had killed his family in the cabin before taking his own life. Sarah couldn't believe what she was reading. She had rented a cabin with a dark and tragic history, and now she was beginning to think that the legend was more than just a story. That night, as the group settled in for another uneasy sleep, Sarah heard something outside the cabin. She crept to the window and peered out into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing. But then, she caught a glimpse of movement in the trees. She squinted, trying to make out what was there. And that's when she saw it. A figure, standing in the shadows, watching the cabin. Sarah's heart raced as she realized that the legend of Jack might be true. They were not alone in the woods, and something sinister was lurking just outside. The group tried to pack up and leave the cabin, but they quickly realized they were lost. The forest seemed to shift and move, making it impossible for them to find their way back to civilization. As night fell again, the group huddled together in the cabin, too afraid to even speak. But they could feel it. The presence of something else in the cabin with them. They heard footsteps, whispers, and scratching on the walls. Sarah was convinced that they were being haunted by the ghosts of Jack's family. She remembered the legend she had read about how Jack's family had been killed in the cabin, and she realized that they were in the very room where the murders had taken place. The group was trapped in the cabin, unable to leave and unable to escape the horrors that awaited them. As the night wore on, the presence grew stronger, and the group could no longer deny what was happening. They saw shadows moving in the corners of their eyes, heard the creaking of the floorboards, and felt the cold touch of invisible hands. Sarah realized that they were all in grave danger, and she knew they had to do something. She suggested that they perform a cleansing ritual to rid the cabin of the evil presence. The group was hesitant at first, but they were desperate to try anything. They gathered all the sage they could find and lit it, walking through the cabin saying prayers to banish the spirits. As they performed the ritual, they felt the air around them grow lighter, and the presence that had been haunting them began to fade. Finally, it was gone. The group sat in silence for a few minutes, catching their breath and feeling grateful to be alive. Sarah broke the silence. "We need to leave this place. This cabin has become dangerous and we should never come back." They quickly packed their belongings and made their way out of the cabin, back into the woods. It was still dark outside, but they didn't care. They just needed to get as far away from the cabin as possible. As they walked, Sarah looked back at the cabin. She could feel a sense of relief and a sense of sadness at the same time. They had survived, but they had also experienced something that would stay with them forever. The group finally found their way back to civilization and returned home, grateful to be alive but haunted by the memory of the cabin. They never spoke of their experience again, but they knew that the memory would always be with them. It was a beautiful day in midsummer when Emma and her friends decided to book a weekend getaway on Airbnb. They were all excited to have a change of scenery and relax in a cozy cabin in the woods. They found a perfect place that was within their budget, and the pictures looked amazing. The cabin was surrounded by trees and had a beautiful view of the mountains. They quickly made the booking and eagerly waited for the weekend to arrive. On Friday afternoon, they arrived at the cabin, and it was even better than the pictures. The cabin was cozy, clean, and well decorated. They quickly settled in and started exploring the area. The first night was uneventful, and they all had a good night's sleep. The next day, they decided to go hiking and explore the nearby woods. As they were walking, they noticed something strange. The woods were quiet, too quiet. There were no birds chirping, no animals rustling, just complete silence. Emma shrugged it off and thought it was just a coincidence. As they continued walking, they came across a small creek, and Emma noticed something floating in the water. It was a small doll, and it looked old and tattered. Emma picked it up and examined it. She noticed that the doll had a name tag attached to it, and it read Annabelle. Emma's friends urged her to throw the doll away, but Emma insisted on keeping it. She felt sorry for the doll and thought it would be cool to keep it as a souvenir. They continued their hike and returned to the cabin late in the afternoon. That night, things started to get strange. Emma and her friends were sitting in the living room, watching TV, when they heard a faint knocking sound. At first, they thought it was just the wind, but the knocking continued. They got up to investigate and noticed that the sound was coming from the front door. Emma cautiously opened the door, but no one was there. They shrugged it off and went back to watching TV. However, the knocking sound continued, and it was getting louder. Emma's friends were getting scared, and they asked her to call the Airbnb host. The host reassured them that it was probably just a tree branch hitting the window and that there was nothing to worry about. But the knocking sound persisted throughout the night, and they were all unable to sleep. The next day, Emma and her friends decided to explore the nearby town. They visited a few shops and cafes and decided to stop at a local antique store. As they were browsing through the store, Emma noticed something familiar on one of the shelves. It was an old photo album, and on the cover, it read Annabelle's Memories. Emma opened the album and started flipping through the pages. The photos were old, and they looked like they were taken in the 1800s. The pictures showed a family, and in every photo, there was a small doll that looked exactly like the one Emma found in the creek. Emma was shocked, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She immediately bought the album and took it back to the cabin. That night, the knocking sound returned, and it was even louder than before. Emma's friends were terrified, and they begged her to call the police. Emma tried to call the police, but there was no cell phone reception. They were completely isolated, and they had no choice but to spend the night in the cabin. As they were huddled together in the living room, Emma remembered the photo album she had bought earlier that day. She decided to look through it again and noticed something strange. In every photo that had the small doll, there was a strange figure lurking in the background. It was too blurry to make out, but it looked like a figure standing in the background. Emma tried to focus on the figure, but it was too hard to make out. Suddenly, the knocking sound stopped, and everything was quiet again. Emma's friends were too scared to move, and they sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then, they heard footsteps coming from the hallway. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, and they seemed to be getting closer and closer. Emma's friends were paralyzed with fear, and they couldn't move. As the footsteps got closer, Emma noticed something strange. The doll that she had found in the creek was no longer on the shelf where she had placed it. It was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was the same figure that was lurking in the background of the photos in the album. It was a tall, dark figure, and it was holding the small doll in its hand. Emma's friends screamed, and they ran towards the door, but it was locked. They were trapped, and there was nowhere to go. The figure slowly walked towards them, and Emma could see its eyes, glowing red in the darkness. Just as the figure was about to reach them, Emma woke up. She was sweating profusely, and she realized it was all just a nightmare. She looked around the cabin, and everything was as it should be. The doll was on the shelf, and her friends were fast asleep in their beds. Relieved that it was just a dream, Emma went back to sleep. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She couldn't explain the strange silence of the woods, the knocking sound, or the eerie presence of the small doll. The next morning, Emma and her friends packed up their things and left the cabin. They were glad to be leaving, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them. Emma kept the photo album and the small doll as a reminder of their strange weekend getaway. Years later, Emma was cleaning out her attic when she found the photo album and the small doll. She decided to do some research and found out that the cabin they had stayed in was built on top of an old cemetery. It was believed that the small doll belonged to a young girl who died on the land many years ago. The knocking sound they had heard was believed to be the ghost of the girl trying to communicate with them. Emma was shocked, and she couldn't believe that their nightmare was actually a reality. She decided to return the photo album and the small doll to the town's historical society, hoping that it would bring some peace to the restless spirits. Emma never forgot about that weekend getaway, and she made sure to never book an Airbnb again without doing proper research. It was a dark and stormy night when four friends decided to rent an Airbnb in the middle of nowhere. They had heard rumors about the old mansion, but they didn't believe in ghost stories. They were excited about their weekend getaway and had no idea what was in store for them. The Airbnb was located in a secluded area surrounded by tall trees. The property was huge, with a grand entrance, a large courtyard, and a beautiful garden. The mansion was old, but it had been renovated to accommodate guests. The interior was modern and luxurious, with antique furniture and decorations that added to its charm. As soon as they arrived, the friends were greeted by the host, a friendly man named Jean. He showed them around the house and gave them the keys before leaving them to settle in. The friends spent the evening exploring the house and enjoying the amenities. They cooked dinner in the fully equipped kitchen, watched movies in the cozy living room, and even played board games in the dining room. But as the night grew darker, strange things began to happen. The electricity started flickering, and the lights in the house started to dim. The friends brushed it off as a power outage and decided to go to bed early. However, they were awakened in the middle of the night by strange noises coming from the hallway. The four friends got out of bed to investigate, but they couldn't find anything unusual. However, the doors to the rooms kept opening and closing by themselves. They felt a chill down their spine and a sense of unease. They tried to ignore it and went back to bed, hoping it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. The next day, they woke up to a beautiful morning, and they decided to explore the garden. As they were walking through the garden, they stumbled upon a hidden door in the bushes. Curious, they decided to investigate, and what they found was shocking. The door led to an old basement, filled with dusty furniture and strange objects. There was a locked cabinet in the corner, and the friends couldn't resist the temptation to open it. Inside, they found a collection of old books and a handwritten note that read, "Beware of the curse." The friends were intrigued but didn't take the note seriously. They spent the rest of the day exploring the area, visiting local shops and restaurants, and enjoying their time together. But as soon as they returned to the mansion, strange things started happening again. The lights were flickering, the doors were opening and closing, and the atmosphere was eerie. The friends tried to ignore it and spent the evening watching movies and playing games. But as the night grew darker, the situation escalated. They heard footsteps coming from the hallway, but when they went to check, nobody was there. They saw shadows moving in the corners of their eyes, but when they turned around, there was nothing. They heard voices whispering, but they couldn't understand what they were saying. The friends were scared and wanted to leave, but they couldn't find the keys to the car. They searched the entire house but couldn't find them anywhere. They decided to call John, but their phones had no signal. They were trapped in the mansion, and they didn't know what to do. As they were trying to figure out a way out, they heard a loud noise coming from upstairs. They went to investigate and found that the door to the attic was wide open. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to explore the attic. The attic was dark and filled with old furniture and cobwebs. There was a strange smell in the air, and the atmosphere was heavy. They walked around, looking for clues or a way out, but what they found was much worse. In the corner of the attic, they found an old chest, covered in dust and cobwebs. As they approached it, they heard a faint whispering coming from inside the chest. They hesitated for a moment, but their curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to open the chest. Inside, they found a stack of old journals, filled with strange symbols and writings in a language they couldn't understand. The pages were yellowed with age, and the ink had faded. The more they read, the more they realized that the mansion was cursed. According to the journals, the previous owners of the mansion had dabbled in dark magic, summoning evil spirits and making deals with the devil. They had unleashed a curse that would haunt the mansion forever. The current owner, John, had bought the property without knowing the history, and the curse had latched onto him and the Airbnb. The friends were horrified and wanted to leave immediately, but the curse had other plans. As they tried to leave, the doors and windows locked shut, trapping them inside the mansion. They were alone, scared, and helpless. As they wandered around the mansion, they realized that the curse was getting stronger. They heard strange noises, saw apparitions, and felt a presence watching them. They knew they had to break the curse to escape. They went back to the attic and found a ritual that could break the curse. It required a sacrifice, a life for a life. They had to sacrifice someone to break the curse and escape. They were horrified at the thought, but they had no other choice. They drew straws, and one of them was chosen to be the sacrifice. They didn't want to do it, but they knew it was the only way. They performed the ritual, and the curse was broken. The doors and windows unlocked, and they were free to leave. As they left the mansion, they saw John waiting for them outside. He had known about the curse all along and had lured them into the mansion, hoping to break the curse with their sacrifice. He was a follower of dark magic, and the curse had consumed him. The friends ran away as fast as they could, never looking back. They knew they had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. They reported the incident to the police, but they found no trace of John or the cursed mansion. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The friends never spoke about the incident again, but they never forgot it either. They knew that evil spirits and curses were real, and that sometimes, it's better to stay away from things we don't understand. The Airbnb they had rented had become a cautionary tale, a warning to others to stay away from the cursed mansion.